Welcome back. Welcome to another video in this series. Now, in the last videos, we set up our backend and we implemented backend authentication so that we're not able to create any quotes if we're not logged in. In the very last videos, we did this in Angular 2. We added some views which allow the user to sign up and sign in and send this token to the server. And now we're going to do the same thing with Vue.js. Now, for this, I opened the application here in Vue.js. And if we open up the developer tools and the console, you see that if we try to create a new quote, like here, a new quote, and we send this, we get an error. And this error occurs because, well, we're not authenticated. We're not sending a token with the request. So we need to make sure that we do send such a token. And for that, as mentioned before, we need to sign up a user. I'll go back into my Vue.js project for this, and I think it makes sense to create a new component for this because we have components for creating quotes and seeing all the quotes. Now, signing up a user is a brand new task, and therefore deserves its own component. So I'm just going to call this signup.vue. And in this file here, I of course need a template as in every Vue component. And of course, we're going to have a script section where we handle the submission of this form. So in the template, I'm going to create a form element without an action, of course, because we don't want to send a HTTP request, which would be the default if we leave the action on that. But instead, we want to handle the form submission through Vue.js. Now, for this form or for this sign-up process, we need a couple of fields like the username, the email, and the password. So I'm going to use some Bootstrap classes since we installed the Bootstrap CSS framework in this project here. So the first thing which I'm going to add here is a div with a form group CSS class on it. This is a normal Bootstrap CSS class. And in there, we're going to have a label for our username, where we say username, for example. And below that, an input field. And this input field will be of type text, and it will be, or will have an ID of username, a name of username, and it will have a class of form control just to give it some styling. Now, with this, with Vue.js, we want to bind this username to a property of our Vue.js instance here. Therefore, in the script section, I'm of course exporting my Vue.js object in this component. And there, I'll add the data method. And there we, as always, return this data object. On this data object, I'll add a username property, which by default is just an empty string. And with that added, we can add the vmodel directive to this input and bind it to our username data field. And I'm just going to format this a bit differently so that it's easier to read. Now with that in place, we're fetching the first field, the first data point we need, the username. Now let's quickly duplicate this to also fetch the email and the password. Now for the email here, I'm of course going to change the ID and name of this to email. Let's also put email or just mail on the label here. And let's change the property to which we bind to email to. Now, clearly we haven't created that yet, so let's quickly add it in our data field down there. Email, which is empty by default, do. And then here for the password, I'm going to do the very same. Change the type to password here, and of course put password on the label, and bind to the password data property. Again, we need, of course, we need to add this down there. Now, another thing I'm going to change is that I'll set the type of my email from text to email here, just to get some built-in validation. And that's some important step. We could add a better validation here with some third-party package because Vue.js itself doesn't include validation. We could add a package like vvalidate. I'm not going to do this here since I really want to focus on the sign-up process, but that would be a great enhancement of this to make sure that if the user enters some wrong data, you instantly show an error or something like that. Now, with that, we're binding all the inputs. We do have our form. The missing piece, of course, is that we need a button to submit this form. So I'll make this of type submit and simply say sign up on the button. Let's give it some Bootstrap styling like button primary. And very important, let's add a click listener. And on this click listener, I'm going to add a modifier with .prevent. Now what this does is it makes sure that once we click this button, we're not doing the default of submitting the form. It prevents the default. That is why it's called prevent. And instead, we only execute the code we specify here. So I want to execute the, let's say, sign up method. You can call this whatever you like. So let's add this method here in our Vue object under the methods object. I'm going to add sign up as a method, and this is going to get executed whenever we, click this button and try to submit our form. Now, before I continue with this, let's quickly hook this sign up component up in our routing so that we can actually see if it looks all right. So I'm going to add a new route here in our routes array, path could be just, well, let's say sign up. And we load the sign up component, which I of course need to import here. So at the top below the other components here, I'm going to import sign up from /components signup.vue. With that, we do have this route registered. And in our application, if I now go to /signup here, we see this form, and yeah, it's a bit broad, but you could, of course, narrow it down. But it has all the fields, looks all right. And if we hit the button right now, nothing should happen, which is the case. So this is looking good. We prevent the default. Now let's send this HTTP request to actually create the user on the backend. Or well, before doing this, let me quickly add an entry to our menu so that we actually can go to the sign up page without having to type it in the address bar. So to /signup, and then simply add sign up here as a text. And with that, we have a more convenient way of going there. Yeah, there it is. So let's add a pipe symbol in between, just for styling reasons. That looks all right. Now to the HTTP request. We already send HTTP requests, for example, when we submit a new quote. We use Axios for this, and of course you could use another package, but yeah, I of course will stick to Axios since we already use it in this project. And we see how we can send a post request here with the post method. Now we also know which route to target. I'm in the backend code, the Laravel code in this case here, and there we created a couple of user-related routes, these two routes here. Now here I have the /user route, and that is the route which, when receiving a post request, will try to sign a user up to create a user targeting this sign up method in the controller. So it's a post request to /user, which will initialize the sign up process on the backend. Therefore, I'm simply going to copy this code from the new quote component and add it in the sign up method in the sign up component. With this, we're almost there. Of course, I need to import Axios. So I'm going to copy this import statement here too, so that we can use it in this file. So let me quickly put it in here. And of course, the route is not correct. We shouldn't target API/quotes. We should target API/user. Or was it users? No, just user. So that is the route we should target. And the content we send, of course, is a different one too. If we have a look at our backend, at the controller which will receive this request, this is the user controller, and there the sign up method, we see that we require a name, an email, and a password. So we should make sure that these three fields are there when we send a request. So the name should, of course, keep or hold our username. The email should store our, well, email. And the password should, of course, send this password the user entered, which we store in this data property here. So this looks all right. One more thing we need to do though, we have some validation in place on the backend here, which is very important because we don't want to create a user if any of these data fields is not valid, if email is not an email or something like that. So in order for this to work correctly and for Laravel to identify that we're sending a request via AJAX, we need to set a specific header. And we do this by passing a third argument to the post method, which also is a JavaScript object where we can configure this request. Now, you could pass a lot of configuration to that. The configuration we need here is the headers field. And as a side note, if you want to find out more about the possible configuration you can pass, of course, the official page on GitHub about Axios is the right place to get started. Now, the headers field here simply takes an object as a value, and there we need one specific header. And this is X requested with. We already sent this header in the Angular 2 frontend. We of course need to do it here too. The value of this field, of this property, is the XML HTTP request to simply tell our backend that this is sent via a AJAX request. Now, with this in place, we should be able to submit this and to sign a user up. So let's see if this works as expected by opening up the console. Let me quickly clear it here. And then I'm just going to choose any username here and enter, let's say, a test email address, some password here. Let's hit submit. And this looks all right. We get back an answer where the status text is created. Let's also have a look at the database. And there, if we open up the users table, we clearly see that a new user was created. The date looks about right. And we see that all the data was stored, the data we entered. So with that, we created the user on the backend. Now let me quickly show you what happens if we send invalid data, like for example, omitting the @ sign in the email address. If I hit sign up now, we correctly get back this error with status code 422 unprocessable entity. Now, of course, you could catch this error. We already do catch it actually, but of course you could use this error now to show a modal, to display it in the view here in our template. I'm not going to do this here though, because I really just wanted to focus on submitting the data, and that works. We're able to sign up a user. Now that we have such a user on the backend, we can use this in the next video where we will actually implement a sign-in functionality to not only create users, but to use them to issue JWT tokens to the frontend before we then have a look at sending those tokens. See you there. Bye.